Commander Vextai of the Krillian Empire shifted uncomfortably in the sterile chair, his three eyes focusing on the recording device before him. The veteran's scaled hide bore deep scars from plasma burns, and his left arm hung useless at his side, a permanent reminder of humanity's fury. The rehabilitation center on Kepler Station buzzed with quiet activity around them. Other alien veterans moved through the corridors, some missing limbs, others bearing psychological wounds that would never fully heal. The air recyclers hummed steadily, filtering the atmosphere for dozens of different species who had all learned the same harsh lesson about underestimating humans. You want to know about the humans? Vextai's voice rasped through the translator, each word carrying the weight of bitter experience. Then listen carefully, young one. What I tell you may save your species from making the same mistake we did. The interviewer, a junior officer from the Galactic Council named Zefkul, leaned forward eagerly. His species, the Vorthan, had never encountered humans directly. Their homeworld lay in the peaceful inner spiral, far from the chaos that had consumed the outer rim territories. His forearms fidgeted with nervous energy as he adjusted the recording equipment. Commander, our intelligence reports suggest humans are a relatively new spacefaring species. Surely they couldn't pose a significant threat to established galactic powers. Vextai's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter, but the sound held no humor. That's exactly what we thought. Young Zefkul, the Krillian Empire had conquered 47 star systems. Our military had never known defeat. We had plasma cannons that could melt through titanium, energy shields that could deflect asteroids, and warriors bred for combat from birth. The old veteran's good hand traced the deep scar running from his left eye to his throat. This came from a human weapon. Do you know what it was? Not some advanced energy beam or molecular disruptor. It was a piece of sharpened metal attached to a wooden stick, a spear. They call it, made from scrap metal and a broken chair leg. Zefkul's eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. How could primitive weapons penetrate Krillian armor? Because the human wielding it didn't care about the armor, Vextai replied, his voice growing distant. She was a civilian engineer named Park Yijin. Her daughter had been killed in our first bombardment of their colony. When we breached their defenses, she came at me with nothing but rage and that makeshift spear. She died, but not before marking me forever. The commander stood slowly, his damaged body protesting the movement. He walked to the window overlooking the station's main docking bay, where ships from across the galaxy came and went in peaceful commerce. Tell me about your first encounter with them. Zefkul pressed gently. Vextai's eyes dimmed as memories flooded back. It was during the Outer Rim expansion. We thought they were just another primitive species, bipedal, fragile-looking, with no natural weapons. How wrong we were. He turned back to face the interviewer, his expression haunted. The humans had only been in space for maybe 50 of their years. Their ships were crude, their weapons basic. Their technology decades behind us, on paper. They should have been extinct within a cycle. What changed? Zefkul asked, genuinely curious now. We landed on their first colony world expecting easy conquest. The population was only about 10,000, mostly scientists, engineers, and their families. My tactical computer calculated a 99.7% probability of victory within 6 hours, Vextai's voice cracked slightly. The battle lasted 3 months. The veteran returned to his chair, settling with obvious pain. You see, we had studied their biology, their technology, their military capacity. But we never studied their spirit. We never understood what we were really fighting, which was parents protecting their children, engineers who would rather die than let their families suffer, scientists who turned their research tools into weapons overnight. We thought we were conquering a species instead. We kicked a sleeping giant. Vextai leaned forward, his three eyes fixing on Zefkul with intense focus. Every species we had conquered before followed predictable patterns. When faced with overwhelming force, they surrendered. When their leaders were killed, they collapsed. When their military was defeated, they submitted. Humans did none of these things. Then what did they do? They got angry, Vextai said simply. And when humans get angry, they don't just fight, they innovate. They adapt. They turn every disadvantage into a weapon. Within days of our invasion, their children were building bombs from kitchen supplies. Their elderly were setting traps that killed veteran soldiers. Their wounded were crawling from hospital beds to fight again. The recording device continued its steady hum, capturing every word of the veteran's testimony. Round them, the rehabilitation center's evening shift began their rounds, tending to the war's broken survivors. "I've fought across the galaxy for 30 cycles," Vextai continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen species that could breathe fire, others that could phase through solid matter, creatures that could survive in the vacuum of space. But I've never encountered anything as terrifying as a human who has nothing left to lose. We called it the Soul Station Incident," Vextai began, his voice heavy with regret. The old warrior's scales seemed to darken as he spoke, a biological response his species couldn't control when remembering trauma. A human research facility on the edge of their territory. Intelligence suggested minimal defenses, perhaps 50 humans total. Zefkul adjusted his recording device, noting how the veteran's good hand had begun to shake. What was the strategic value of this station? That's what we couldn't understand, Vextai replied, his claws scraping against the metal table. It wasn't a military base or weapons facility, just scientists studying space minerals and developing new alloys. To us, it seemed like the perfect target, isolated, poorly defended, and full of valuable research data we could steal. The veteran's three eyes unfocused as he stared past his interviewer. My battalion consisted of 300 elite Krillian warriors. Each one had survived at least 10 combat drops. We had plasma rifles, energy shields, and full battle armor. The siege should have lasted hours instead. It became a nightmare that haunted us for cycles. He paused, reaching for a glass of synthesized water with his functioning arm. The station orbited a dead moon, completely cut off from any human military support. Our ships surrounded it within minutes. I gave them one chance to surrender, and their response. Dr. Kim Hyun-woo, their lead scientist, came on the communication channel. He was maybe 40 human years old, wearing a simple lab coat covered in chemical stains. He looked at me through the screen and said, "We respectfully decline your generous offer." Then he smiled. That smile should have warned me. Vextai's mandibles clicked nervously. Among the human defenders were this Dr. Kim Hyun-woo, a brilliant scientist who had somehow turned the station's research equipment into improvised weapons, and Captain Park Do-yoon, a security officer who had never commanded more than a dozen guards before that day. The commander stood again, pacing to work off nervous energy. We launched our first assault 12 hours later. Standard Krillian tactics, overwhelming force applied to the weakest point. 50 shock troopers in full combat gear hit the main airlock simultaneously. What happened? The first wave was slaughtered. Vextai continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Hyun-woo had created some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon from their laboratory equipment. The moment our soldiers breached the airlock, every piece of our technology died. No weapons, no shields, no communication. They were sitting ducks. The veteran's good eye twitched as he relived the memory. But that wasn't the worst part. Do-yoon had somehow organized the civilians like they were seasoned soldiers. Engineers became snipers, Positioning themselves in maintenance shafts with makeshift rifles, researchers became demolition experts. Mixing chemicals from their labs into explosives I'd never seen before, Zefkul leaned forward. Fascinated despite himself. How long did the siege last? 43 days. Vextai said flatly. 43 days of hell. Every time we adapted to their tactics, they changed. Every weakness we exploited, they turned into a trap. The commander returned to his chair, his movements stiff with old pain. The siege stretched on for weeks. When Krillian forces finally breached the outer defenses, we found the humans had turned every corridor into a killing field. Maintenance worker Legion Ho had rigged the ventilation system with explosive charges. One wrong step, and entire sections of the station would detonate. They were willing to destroy their own home. They weren't just willing, they were eager. Medical officer Choi Soo-yeon had weaponized surgical equipment and was treating human wounded while simultaneously setting traps for alien invaders. She used medical scanners to detect our approach through the walls, then triggered explosive devices made from oxygen tanks and cleaning chemicals. Vextai's voice grew even quieter. But the humans weren't just fighting to kill us. They were fighting to delay us. Every trap, every ambush, every desperate last stand was designed to buy time for something bigger. Which was, they were transmitting everything, every tactical move we made, every weakness they discovered in our equipment, every psychological profile they built of our species. They were turning their deaths into intelligence data for other human colonies, the veterans remaining functional ungestured weekly. I lost 60 soldiers trying to take their communication center. When we finally broke through, we found a teenage girl named Han Menseo maintaining the transmission equipment. She couldn't have been more than 16 human years old. Zefkul waited as Vextai collected himself, clearly struggling with a memory. She was wounded, bleeding badly from shrapnel. Any rational being would have surrendered instead. She looked at my soldiers advancing toward her and activated a device she'd hidden under the console. Ian, what kind of device? A fusion battery rigged to overload. She'd turned their power source into a bomb. Vextai's voice cracked with emotion. They fought like demons. But what terrified us most wasn't their ferocity, it was their sacrifice. This young human named Han Menseo, barely out of adolescence, detonated herself along with 30 of my best soldiers just to buy her friends 10 more minutes to complete their data transmission. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the station's ambient sounds. In those final moments, as the explosion consumed everything round her, she was still smiling. Just like Dr. Kim had smiled when he refused our surrender demand. They knew they were going to die, but they also knew their deaths would save others. After Seoul Station, High Command decided humans were more dangerous than anticipated. Vextai continued, his voice growing darker. The veteran's scales had shifted to a deep purpler color that indicated deep shame among his species. The loss of an entire battalion to 50 civilians had shaken the Empire's confidence. They needed a victory. Something to prove that humans could still be defeated. Zefkul noticed how the other patients in the rehabilitation center had grown quiet, as if sensing the weight of the story being told. What was your next assignment? They sent me to track down escaped prisoners on the death world of Kepler-4 to be. 12 humans had crashed there during a transport mission. Vextai's good hand traced patterns on the table as he spoke. The transport was carrying captured human soldiers to a prison facility when it was damaged by an asteroid field. The ship made an emergency landing on the most hostile planet in that sector. The interviewers for arms gestured with curiosity. What made this world so dangerous? Kepler-4 to be was classified as a Class X death world by every civilized species in the galaxy. The planet was a nightmare of carnivorous flora and predatory fauna. The trees could literally eat you alive, their roots sensing movement from kilometers away. The air was breathable but filled with spores that caused hallucinations in most species and the wildlife. Vexed, I shuddered. The razor claw pack hunters moved in groups of 50. Each one the size of a small spacecraft. The Void Stalkers were invisible predators that could phase through solid matter. Even the insects were deadly swarms of acidic beetles that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. Most species avoided it entirely. We used it as a dumping ground for our most dangerous criminals. Knowing they'd be dead within hours, Zifkul leaned back, impressed despite himself. And you expected to find 12 human corpses. The Krillians expected to find 12 corpses within days. My orders were simple. Confirm the deaths, retrieve any useful intelligence from the crash site, and return home. What should have been a 2-day mission became something else entirely. Vexed, I stood and walked to a wall display showing various star charts. He pointed to a red dot marking Kepler to be location. Instead, they found Major Yoon Ji-hai and her squad had not just survived, they were thriving. How is that possible? That's what I kept asking myself as the evidence piled up. We landed, expecting to find a crash site and some bones. Instead, we found an organized camp with defensive positions, water purification systems, and food storage. Technical Sergeant Kang Duhayan had somehow tamed one of the native predators and was using it to hunt Krillian scouts. The veteran's 3 eyes focused on different points in the room. A sign of extreme agitation. Do you understand what I'm telling you? This human had taken a creature that our xenobiologists classified as untamable razor claw alpha that stood 3 meters tall with claws that could tear through battle armor and turned it into a hunting companion. We found paw prints and boot prints working together, tracking our soldiers like prey. What about the other humans? Private Nam Yujin had been wounded in the crash, her leg broken in 3 places. Any reasonable person would have been dead weight to the group. Instead, she had created an entire network of underground shelters using nothing but salvaged materials. From their crashed transport, she'd somehow learned to read the planet's geological patterns and build hideouts that were invisible from above but connected by tunnels that allowed rapid movement. Vextia's voice grew more animated as he relived the impossible situation. Sergeant Limherin had somehow decoded our communication frequencies and was feeding us false information. She spoke perfect Krillian, mimicking our officers' voices so well that my own soldiers were following orders from the enemy without realizing it. How long did the hunt last? We hunted them for 23 days. 23 days of watching. The hunters become the hunted. Every morning, we'd find more of our soldiers missing. They weren't killing them quickly, they were studying us, learning our weaknesses. The commander's voice cracked with emotion. Captain Shin Woo-jin was their leader before the war. He'd been a simple infantry officer who'd never commanded more than a platoon. On that death world, he became something else entirely. He learned to speak to the planet's creatures, to read their movement patterns, to predict where they'd hunt next. The humans were cooperating with the native wildlife, not just cooperating commanding them. Woo-jin had figured out that the Void Stalkers responded to ultrasonic frequencies. He'd salvaged a communication device and modified it to essentially give orders to invisible predators. My soldiers would be walking patrol when suddenly they'd be attacked by creatures they couldn't even see. Vextai returned to his seat, his movements heavy with exhaustion. The pursuit ended when the humans turned the tables completely. Captain Shin Woo-jin led a coordinated assault on our base camp using the planet's own ecosystem. As weapons, the carnivorous plants attacked on schedule. The insect swarms followed precise timing, and the razor claws moved like a trained army. What was the result by the time reinforcements arrived? 200 elite hunters had been reduced to 37 survivors. But here's the part that still haunts me. Vextia's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The humans offered us medical aid after everything we'd done to them. After hunting them like animals for weeks, they saved our lives. The silence in the room was profound as Zefkul processed this information. Major Yunji-hai herself treated my wounds while I was unconscious when I woke up. She was sitting beside my medical bed, keeping watch to make sure the planet's scavengers didn't attack our makeshift hospital. She looked at me and said, "War doesn't have to make us into monsters. The final battle came at Incheon Colony." Vextai continued, his remaining functional hand trembling as he reached for his water glass. The liquid sloshed us. Memories of that terrible day flooded back. By this point, the war had been raging for 2 years. Human resistance had cost us more ships and soldiers than the previous 50 years of conquest combined. Zefkul noticed how other veterans in the rehabilitation center had stopped their conversations, drawn by the intensity in Vextia's voice. Even aliens from different species recognized the tone of someone reliving their worst. "Nightmare, what made Incheon so important?" the interviewer asked softly. "It was humanity's last major colony," Vextai explained, his scales shifting to a pale grey, the color of deep fear among his kind, after we'd taken their outer worlds and mining stations. Incheon was where they'd gathered their remaining civilian population, 2 million humans, mostly families, researchers, and the elderly. Our intelligence suggested it would be their final surrender point. The veterans' 3 eyes focused on different points as he continued. Our entire war fleet, over 10,000 ships, surrounded their last stronghold, dreadnoughts the size of small moons. Carrier vessels packed with fighter craft, destroyer squadrons that could glass entire planets. The largest military force the Krillian Empire had ever assembled. Surely the humans couldn't match such overwhelming force. That's what we thought. Admiral Baek Sujin commanded the human defense fleet of barely 300 vessels. Most weren't even military ships, converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, passenger liners with makeshift weapons bolted to their hulls. It should have been a massacre lasting minutes, not hours. Vextai stood again, his damaged body protesting, but unable to remain still while recounting the battle. "I was commanding a destroyer squadron on the fleet's right flank. When we offered them surrender terms, I expected immediate capitulation. Instead, Admiral Beck came on the communication channel herself. What did she say? She was maybe 50 human years old, with grey hair and kind eyes. She looked tired, like someone who'd been carrying impossible weight for too long. But when she spoke, her voice was steel. Vextia's good hand clenched into a fist. She said, "We offer you a counteroffer. Leave our system now, and we'll let you go home to your families." The interviewer's forearms gestured in disbelief. 300 ships against 10,000, and she threatened you. That's exactly what I thought. My tactical officers were laughing, but Admiral Beck wasn't finished. She continued. "We know you have families. Commander Vextai, we know you have children waiting for you on Krillo's Prime. We don't want to make them orphans. This is your only chance to prevent that." Vextia's voice grew quiet. She knew my name. She knew about my offspring. Somehow, these humans had intelligence on our personal lives, our home worlds, our families. In that moment, I realized we weren't fighting just another military force. We were fighting an entire civilization that had committed everything to this battle. What happened next? Her tactical officer, Commander Oh Tai-young, had devised what should have been an impossible strategy, using the colony's civilian transport ships. They created a massive debris field that disrupted our senses. Thousands of cargo containers, construction materials, Even furniture and personal belongings all launched into space to create a cloud of interference around the colony. The veteran began pacing again. His movements agitated our targeting systems. Couldn't lock onto anything. Our energy weapons were scattering off metallic debris. Our sensors were showing false readings everywhere. In minutes, they'd turned their own possessions into a defensive screen. But surely your superior numbers, Captain Gion commanded. Their fighters, Vextai interrupted, his voice gaining intensity. She led suicide runs against our capital ships with nothing but single-pilot craft. These weren't military fighters, they were civilian shuttles, mining pods, even racing craft pressed into service. But the pilots, he shook his head in amazement. Her squadron included pilot No Sunho, who somehow managed to disable our flagship's main weapons using a cargo holder filled with mining explosives. He flew straight at our command ship's weapon ports. Ignoring every defensive gun trying to stop him, the explosion took out our primary artillery just as we were preparing to bombard the colony. Zefkel leaned forward, captivated despite himself. How long did the battle last? 6 hours. 6 hours of the most intense combat I've ever experienced. The battle raged across the entire system. Every time we gained an advantage, another human would make an impossible sacrifice to even the odds. Vextia's voice cracked with emotion. Flight engineer and Kyungsu manually piloted a damaged reactor core into one of our destroyers. His ship was falling apart around him, life support failing, but he held course until impact. The explosion took out 3 of our vessels and created an electromagnetic pulse that disabled a dozen more, and the human casualties. Communications officer Moon Hyung stayed at her post while her section of the orbital station decompressed, coordinating defense patterns until her last breath. I watched her through our scopes, sitting at her console as Vacuum tried to pull her into space. Still directing fighter squadrons even as she died, the silence stretched between them, heavy, with the weight of remembered horror. But the moment that broke us, Vextia's voice became barely audible, was when their colony ship full of civilians, children, elderly ran our command carrier. Captain Songhain Seok didn't hesitate. He saved his people by destroying himself and 3,000 of our finest officers. A colony ship attacked your flagship, the largest civilian vessel in their fleet, packed with families who'd been evacuated from other worlds. Captain Song broadcast on all frequencies as he made his approach for our children's future. That was all he said. Then he rammed the ship, full of innocence, into our most powerful warship. Knowing everyone aboard would die, Vextai collapsed back into his chair, emotionally drained. In that moment, watching that massive civilian ship disappear in nuclear fire along with our command carrier, I finally understood what we were really fighting. Not soldiers, not a military. We were fighting parents who would literally sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to protect their children's future. When the battle ended, we expected vengeance, Vextai concluded, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. The rehabilitation center around them had grown completely silent. Every alien veteran and staff member drawn to his words, our command structure was shattered. Half our fleet was destroyed or disabled. We were floating in space, helpless, waiting for other humans to finish what we'd started. Zefkel set down his recording device, completely absorbed in the story. What did they do? Instead, Admiral Beck offered us something we'd never experienced before, Mercy. Vextia's scale shifted to a lighter blue, indicating deep confusion. Even years later, she came on our emergency frequencies 12 hours after the battle ended. Our remaining ships were drifting, life support failing, medical bays overflowing with wounded. We were preparing for execution. The veteran's good hand traced the deep scar on his throat as he continued. Admiral Beek's voice was calm, almost gentle. She said, "This is Admiral Beck's Sujin to all Krillian vessels. We're transmitting coordinates for emergency docking. Our medical teams are standing by to treat your wounded. No weapons, no tricks, no conditions, just help. You must have thought it was a trap." Of course we did. No civilized species offers aid to their enemies. It goes against every military doctrine, every survival instinct. But our people were dying. Commander Zithkar, my second in command, had lost both his primary arms in the explosion. Ensign Vectool was barely 18 cycles old. Choking on his own blood from internal injuries, Vextai stood slowly, moving to the window overlooking the station's medical bay. I made the decision to accept their offer. What else could we do? Let my soldiers die to preserve my pride. What happened when you arrived at their station? Human medics were waiting at every docking port. Not soldiers, doctors, nurses, emergency technicians. They had medical stretchers ready, surgical equipment prepared, blood supplies organized. They'd been planning to save us even while we were still trying to kill them, the veterans three. Eyes focused on the memory, his voice growing stronger. Dr. Park Sung-min operated on Commander Zithkar for 14 hours straight. This human surgeon, whose own species we'd been trying to exterminate, worked through an entire day cycle to save my officer's life. When I asked him why, he just shrugged and said, "Because he needed help." Zefkul shifted in his seat, trying to process this information. Surely there were conditions, terms of surrender. That's what we kept expecting. But weeks passed, and no demands came. The peace negotiations were led by diplomat Dr. Yan Haijin, who had lost her entire family in the war, her parents, her spouse, her two children all killed when we bombarded New Seoul. She sat across from the same Krillian commanders who had ordered the bombardment of her home world and spoke of forgiveness, of building a future together. The interviewer's forearms gestured in disbelief. How is such forgiveness possible? I asked her that exact question during one of our negotiation sessions. Dr. Yan looked at me with eyes that had seen too much pain, and she explained something. That changed my understanding of their entire species. Vextaya's voice grew quiet with reverence. She told us something I'll never forget. Vextai said, looking directly at his interviewer. She said, "We didn't fight you because we hated you. We fought you because we loved our children more than we feared death. Now that the fighting is over, we choose to love the future more than we hate the past." The silence stretched between them as both aliens contemplated the profound implications of those words. The peace treaty we signed wasn't just an agreement to stop fighting, Vextai continued. It was an invitation to become something better. The humans offered technology sharing, cultural exchange programs, joint exploration missions. They turned their former enemies into allies through the simple act of treating us like people instead of monsters, and your empire accepted this. What choice did we have? The humans had proven they could destroy us if they wanted to. Instead, they chose to heal us. Within a year, Krillian and human engineers were working together on new spacecraft designs. Our children were attending the same schools, learning each other's languages, playing games that mixed both cultures. Vextai moved away from the window, his movements less pained now as he spoke of hope rather than horror. Commander Oh Taeyong, the tactical officer who had orchestrated our defeat, became my counterpart in establishing the new Joint Defense Force. We spent months working together, and I learned that he had 3 offspring of his own. He showed me pictures of them, talked about their dreams and fears, their hopes for the future. Did this change how you viewed humans? It changed how I viewed everything. Captain Jionyang, who had led those impossible fighter attacks, started teaching Krillian pilots her techniques, not as weapons of war, but as methods of rescue and exploration. Pilot no sooner survived his suicide run and became an instructor at our Joint Space Academy. The veteran scales had shifted to a warm golden color, the Krillian expression of deep contentment and peace. The veteran stood slowly, his scarred body moving with difficulty, but his spirit clearly lighter than when the interview began. That's why I agreed to this interview, not to glorify war, but to warn others. Humans don't fight like soldiers, they fight like parents protecting their young. They don't surrender when they're outnumbered. They become more dangerous. They don't break under pressure. They forge themselves into weapons. He moved toward the window, staring out at the stars where ships from dozens of species moved in peaceful commerce. We thought we were conquering a weak species instead. We awakened something that changed the galaxy forever. The humans didn't just win the war, they won our respect, our admiration, and ultimately, our friendship. The rehabilitation center's evening lights began to dim, casting long shadows across the room where former enemies had become allies. Vextai turned back one final time, his three eyes reflecting the starlight from the window. Tell your people, if they ever face humanity in battle, they're not fighting an enemy. They're fighting evolution itself, a species that turns every disadvantage into a weapon, every loss into motivation, and every impossible situation into their finest hour. But more importantly, tell them that humans are capable of something even more powerful than war. They're capable of forgiveness, healing, and turning the deepest hatred into the strongest friendship. The recording device clicked off. With a soft beep, capturing the last words of testimony that would indeed echo through galactic history, Vextai walked slowly toward the door, no longer the broken veteran who had started the interview, but a being transformed by the simple human concept of redemption through understanding. As Zefkal packed up his equipment, he noticed other veterans throughout the center, former enemies from dozens of conflicts, all living together in peace. The humans hadn't just won their wars through superior tactics or technology. They'd won something far more valuable, the possibility of a future where former enemies could become family. The testament was complete, but its impact was just beginning. Asterisk, asterisk, the end, asterisk, asterisk.